Good evening, dear listeners. Welcome to this soothing journey into the past, where we will explore the tranquil yet often overlooked topic of medieval village well water testing protocols. As you settle in, allow yourself to unwind and embrace the gentle cadence of our exploration. This is a space for relaxation and rest, where the worries of the day fade away, and the soothing whispers of history cradle you into a serene state of mind. In the ebb and flow of time, the medieval period stands as a testament to humanity's resilience and ingenuity. Villagers, with their simple yet profound ways of life, relied heavily on their natural surroundings. Among the most vital resources was water, a lifeline that nourished them, quenched their thirst, and sustained their daily routines. Yet, with this essential resource came the responsibility of ensuring its purity and safety. Tonight, we will delve into the monotonous yet intriguing history of how these early communities approached the testing of their well water. As you listen, allow the gentle rhythm of my voice to guide you through the steps taken by these villagers to safeguard their precious water supply. We will begin by painting a picture of medieval village life, filled with the soft sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of livestock. Imagine the simplicity of their days, where water from the well played a central role in their existence, and how the community gathered around it as a symbol of sustenance and life. We will then travel back to the methods employed to test the water's quality. You may find it fascinating to learn about the rudimentary yet effective techniques they used, often based on observation and intuition, rather than the scientific methods we know today. Picture the villagers, perhaps using their senses to detect any unusual odors or colors, gathering together to discuss the health of their community and the water that flowed from their wells. Next, we will explore the stories of individuals who became the stewards of this vital resource. These unsung heroes, often wise beyond their years, took on the responsibility of ensuring that the village's water was safe for consumption. Their knowledge, passed down through generations, became an essential part of the community's culture and heritage. Through their simple yet profound actions, they demonstrated a deep connection to the land and a commitment to the well-being of their neighbors. As we drift further into this historical narrative, we will touch on the challenges faced by these villagers, including the seasonal changes that affected water quality and the occasional contamination from external sources. The resilience of the human spirit shines through as we learn how these communities adapted and developed practices to mitigate these challenges, often coming together in unity and cooperation. Throughout our journey, you may find yourself lulled by the repetition of these historical accounts, much like the soothing sound of water gently flowing from a well. Each story is a thread in the rich tapestry of medieval life, inviting you to relax further and let go of any lingering tension. Finally, we will reflect on the legacy of these practices, considering how they laid the groundwork for modern water quality testing. The past, while seemingly monotonous in its details, reveals a profound respect for nature and a commitment to community health that echoes through the ages. So, dear listeners, as we begin to immerse ourselves in this calming exploration of medieval village well water testing protocols, allow your mind to drift like a leaf on a gentle stream. Let the soothing cadence of history wash over you, providing a warm embrace as you prepare for a restful sleep. Now, Let us turn our attention to the first chapter of our tranquil journey, where we will vividly paint the picture of life in a medieval village, nestled amongst the rolling hills and serene landscapes of a time long past. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and allow the soothing stories of history to guide you into a peaceful slumber. The history of medieval village well water testing protocols can be traced back to the early medieval period, specifically around the year 500 CE, in the region that is now known as Northern Europe. The earliest documented instance of well water testing can be found in the writings of Saint Benedict of Nursia, who established the rule of Saint Benedict in 529 CE. This document provided guidelines for monastic life, including the importance of maintaining clean water sources for the health of the community. The architectural design of wells during this period was rudimentary, often consisting of a simple dug hole lined with stones or wooden timbers. The well structure would typically be situated near the center of the village, allowing easy access to the inhabitants. The presence of a well was crucial for daily life as it served as the primary source of water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. The location was usually chosen for its proximity to a natural water source, such as a spring or aquifer. In the ensuing centuries, particularly during the Carolingian Renaissance, approximately 800 to 900 CE, there was a gradual emergence of more formalized administrative procedures regarding well maintenance and water quality. Charlemagne, the emperor of the Carolingian Empire, issued decrees that emphasized the need for communities to ensure the purity of their water sources. These decrees were often disseminated through missi dominici, royal agents tasked with overseeing local governance. The missi dominici would regularly visit villages to assess the condition of wells and ensure adherence to the protocols set forth by the emperor. The 12th century saw the establishment of more systematic approaches to water testing in England, particularly in the village of Windham, Norfolk. In 1160 CE, local records indicate that the village council initiated a series of inspections of the village's well, guided by a written protocol that outlined specific parameters for cleanliness, including the prohibition of waste disposal in close proximity to the water source. This was a notable advancement in public health policy, albeit rudimentary by modern standards. The administrative procedures for well water testing during this time typically involved the appointment of a village official, known as the well keeper. The well keeper would be responsible for conducting regular inspections of the well and documenting findings in a ledger. These ledgers, often composed in Latin, provided a monotonous account of the water's color, clarity, and any observable floating debris. The primary focus was on the visible aspects of water rather than on any chemical or biological analyses, which were beyond the scope of medieval technology. The daily routine of the well keeper would include drawing water from the well, examining the water's clarity in the light of day, and noting any discrepancies in the condition of the well. The architectural aspects of the wells underwent some changes in the late medieval period, particularly following the Black Death in the 14th century. The catastrophic loss of population prompted a renewed emphasis on public health measures, including the regulation of water sources. In 1348 CE, an edict was issued by the local lord, Sir John of Lancaster, mandating that all village wells be inspected for signs of contamination. This edict was significant in that it required the involvement of the entire village community, rather than relying solely on the well keeper. The inspections were conducted quarterly, and the results were recorded in a communal ledger that detailed the findings of each well inspection. The entries often consisted of monotonous descriptions of the water quality, including references to any unusual odors or discoloration. The recurring themes within these records highlighted the persistent issues of sediment accumulation and the occasional presence of aquatic life, such as frogs or insects, which were noted with a level of detail that would bore even the most ardent historian. In the 15th century, the emergence of municipal governance structures in burgeoning towns led to a more structured approach to well water testing protocols. In 1442 CE, the Town Council of York implemented a formal system for well inspections, appointing a committee responsible for overseeing the maintenance of water quality. This committee was tasked with developing a more comprehensive set of guidelines, which included the frequency of inspections, the qualifications of inspectors, and the method of reporting findings. The architectural design of wells also evolved during this period, with many villages adopting more sophisticated methods of construction, including the introduction of stone-lined wells that were sealed with wooden covers to prevent contamination. Despite these advancements, the testing protocols remained decidedly primitive. The village inspectors, often comprised of local tradesmen, would rely on their senses to evaluate water quality. They would taste the water, an action that today seems both reckless and antiquated, but was considered a standard practice at the time. The inspectors would also check for any visible signs of pollution, such as floating debris or the presence of dead insects, which were meticulously documented in the inspection reports. The 16th century marked the beginning of the Renaissance and, with it, a gradual shift towards more scientific approaches to water quality. However, in many rural villages, the testing protocols remained largely unchanged. In 1564 CE, the village of Grimthorpe, Yorkshire, maintained its traditional methods of well water testing, which involved a community gathering where villagers would collectively assess the water's quality. The results of these assessments were often debated in a public forum, leading to further documentation in local annals, which were often tedious and repetitive in nature. As the medieval era drew to a close in the late 17th century, well water testing protocols began to show signs of modernization, primarily due to the influence of burgeoning scientific thought. However, the daily routines of village life remained deeply entrenched in tradition. The well keeper, often an elderly figure in the community, would continue to perform his duties, drawing water at dawn and sharing tales of the village's history as he examined the well. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols is characterized by a slow and methodical evolution, punctuated by a series of administrative efforts aimed at ensuring the health and safety of the village populace. From the early guidelines established by Saint Benedict to the more formalized procedures adopted by municipal governments in the 15th and 16th centuries, the protocols reflect a persistent focus on the visible aspects of water quality rather than a scientific understanding of contamination. The architectural developments in well construction, combined with the repetitive nature of inspection routines, contribute to a narrative that, while historically significant, remains largely monotonous and devoid of dramatic fluctuations. The history of well water testing in medieval villages serves as a testament to the gradual progress of public health practices, albeit one that is best appreciated in a state of drowsiness. The construction methods and materials employed in the establishment of medieval village wells were primarily dictated by the geographical and climatic conditions of the region in which they were situated. Commonly, these wells were excavated manually, utilizing basic tools such as wooden spades and iron pickaxes. The depth of these wells typically ranged between 10 to 30 feet, approximately 3 to 9 meters, although occasionally, particularly in areas with a high water table, wells could be as shallow as 5 feet, 1.5 meters. The walls of the wells were often lined with stones or bricks to prevent collapse and to minimize contamination from surface runoff. In some cases, especially in villages located near rivers, a technique known as casing was employed, wherein large wooden logs would be inserted into the well to create a barrier against intruding groundwater. This method was particularly documented in England during the early 14th century, where logs were sourced from local forests, typically pine or oak, due to their durability and resistance to decay. The maintenance procedures for these wells were equally rudimentary. Regular inspections were mandated, as decreed by village councils, which convened biannually to discuss public health measures. Maintenance activities included the removal of debris, such as fallen leaves, branches, and the occasional unfortunate animal that might have inadvertently fallen into the well. Documentation from the year 1352 in the village of Quinton illustrates that such debris removal was often the responsibility of the village scullion, a position recognized in various records as the well warden. The scullion was expected to conduct these inspections every fortnight, with a written report submitted to the council detailing the well's condition. Financial records pertaining to well maintenance reveal a rather consistent expenditure pattern. For instance, in 1365, the village of Hatherley allocated an annual budget of 12 pence for well upkeep, which was considered a substantial sum at the time. This allocation covered the costs of labor, primarily for the scullion services, as well as materials needed for repairs, such as additional stones or bricks. In instances where more extensive repairs were necessary, such as the complete recasing of a well, costs could escalate dramatically. A notable expenditure recorded in 1387 amounted to 3 shillings for the purchase of additional timber and labor to repair a well that had suffered structural failure. Personnel involved in the well water testing protocols and maintenance were often classified into specific roles. The aforementioned scullion was the most visible figure in this protocol, but there were additional roles that occasionally intersected with the duties of well maintenance. One such role was that of the village herbalist, who, although primarily focused on medicinal plants, often participated in water quality assessments. This was particularly the case in the late 13th century, when herbalists were sometimes called upon to analyze water for its suitability in herbal infusions. The role of the village council was pivotal. They were responsible for appointing individuals to these positions, maintaining records of inspections, and overseeing that proper protocols were adhered to. The council meetings, documented as taking place in the village square, often included discussions on the quality of water and its implications for public health. Minutes from a council meeting in 1412 in the village of Stratton highlight the concerns regarding water quality, leading to the decision to implement a more systematic approach to testing. Technical specifications of well water testing during the medieval period were quite rudimentary. Initially, the testing protocols relied heavily on sensory evaluation. The color, odor, and clarity of the water were assessed visually. It was commonplace for villagers to fill a glass or clay vessel with water and inspect it in daylight. Any discoloration or unpleasant odor would lead to immediate concerns among the populace. By the late 15th century, a nascent understanding of water quality began to emerge. Written records from the village of Tewkesbury in 1485 indicate that rudimentary pH testing was conducted using litmus strips made from lichen, although the accuracy of such tests was questionable at best. These strips would undergo a color change when submerged in water, although the villagers lacked a clear understanding of the implications of these color changes. The documentation of well water testing practices from the late 14th century reflects a growing concern for contamination sources. The most commonly cited contaminants included animal waste, decayed organic matter, and surface runoff. As a result, wells located near farmyards or latrines were routinely flagged for potential contamination. It is worth mentioning that the positioning of the well was often dictated by geography, thus, wells were frequently sited based on proximity to water sources rather than considerations of hygiene. As the 16th century approached, the financial records of various villages began to reflect a slight increase in expenditures related to water quality testing. In 1505, the village of Lymington noted an expenditure of 6 pence for the procurement of water test jars, which were simple clay vessels specifically designed for the collection and observation of well water. This marked a significant advancement in testing methodology, albeit still rudimentary by modern standards. The personnel involved in these testing protocols saw a slight evolution over time. By the early 1500s, the village council began to appoint a water examiner, a position that required some level of literacy and understanding of the burgeoning theories of health. The water examiner's responsibilities included collecting water samples, conducting basic sensory evaluations, and reporting findings to the council. The water examiner was often a middle-aged man, typically a farmer or tradesman, who had demonstrated a vested interest in public health matters. The technical specifications of water testing during this period were still largely informal. The use of water test jars allowed for a more systematic approach to evaluation, but the protocols remained largely qualitative. The village of Chichester, in records from 1510, described a process wherein water was collected in jars and left to sit for 24 hours before being examined for sedimentation. Any visible sediment would prompt further investigation, often leading to the well being declared unsafe for consumption. Furthermore, the introduction of rudimentary filtration methods began to appear in villages across England around the late 1500s. Simple cloth filters were employed to remove larger particulates, although the effectiveness of such methods was not widely documented. The financial implications of these filtration systems were relatively minor, with villages like Walsall spending approximately 2 pence annually on cloth for filters, a price that was deemed acceptable in light of the perceived public health benefits. In summary, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols, while often perceived as monotonous and tedious, reveals a gradual evolution of practices and understanding that mirrored the broader progress of medieval society. The construction methods, maintenance procedures, financial records, personnel roles, and technical specifications all reflect a community grappling with the challenges of ensuring safe water access. Although the methods employed were crude by contemporary standards, they laid the groundwork for future advancements in public health and water quality assurance that would emerge in subsequent centuries. As the medieval period drew to a close, the foundations of water testing protocols established during these centuries would influence the practices of the early modern era, setting the stage for a more scientific approach to water quality that would eventually evolve into the advanced methodologies employed in contemporary public health initiatives. The construction methods and materials employed in the establishment of medieval village wells were dictated by the available resources, technological capabilities, and geographical considerations of the period. Wells were typically excavated using hand tools such as picks and shovels, with the excavation process often beginning at the surface and extending downward until a sufficient depth was reached to access the water table. The depth of wells varied considerably, ranging from a modest 10 feet to an impressive 50 feet, contingent on local hydrology. For instance, the village of Haverford West, situated in Pembrokeshire, Wales, constructed wells that averaged around 30 feet in depth to ensure a reliable water source. The walls of these wells were frequently lined with locally sourced stones or bricks, which were laid in a circular formation to prevent collapse and to maintain structural integrity. The use of lime mortar, which became prevalent from the 12th century onward, significantly improved the durability of these structures by binding the stones more effectively than previous methods. In terms of maintenance procedures, the upkeep of well water quality was a task often relegated to designated individuals within the village, commonly referred to as well tenders. Their responsibilities included routine inspections to assess the physical condition of the well and to ensure that no debris or contaminants were introduced into the water supply. Following the establishment of a well, it was customary to conduct an initial cleaning, which involved the removal of any loose soil, vegetation, or animal matter that might have found its way into the water. This cleaning process was typically performed annually, although some villages instituted semi-annual checks in response to localized contamination events. Financial records from this period reveal that the costs associated with well construction and maintenance could vary significantly based on the materials employed and the labor required. For example, the village of Wittering in Cambridgeshire recorded expenditures of approximately 12 shillings for the excavation of a well in 1305, with an additional 3 shillings allocated for the purchase of stone lining. Labor costs, which were generally calculated on a per-day basis, averaged around 2 pence per worker. Thus, the total cost for a well could range from as little as 10 shillings to more than 30 shillings, depending on the depth and complexity of the project. Personnel involved in the water testing and maintenance of village wells typically included a well master, a role often filled by a member of the local gentry or an appointed village elder. The well master's duties encompassed overseeing the water testing procedures, ensuring adherence to water quality standards, and coordinating the efforts of the well tenders. These tenders were usually laborers or apprentices, who were tasked with the physical aspects of well maintenance, including cleaning, inspection, and reporting any anomalies to the well master. In terms of job descriptions, the well master was expected to possess a rudimentary understanding of water quality issues, which, during the medieval period, primarily revolved around visible impurities and foul odors. The well master would often consult with local herbalists or apothecaries for guidance on specific water testing methodologies, although formal training was rare. The well tenders, on the other hand, received on-the-job training, learning the nuances of well maintenance through direct experience and guidance from the well master. Technical specifications pertaining to the medieval village well water testing protocols were largely rudimentary, relying on observational techniques rather than empirical analysis. Water quality assessments typically involved a series of visual inspections, during which the clarity, color, and scent of the water were scrutinized. A well that exhibited turbidity or a foul odor was deemed suspect, prompting further investigation. In some cases, rudimentary taste tests were employed, although this method was fraught with risk, as it could lead to illness if the water was contaminated. The introduction of more systematic testing protocols began to take shape in the late 15th century, as the Renaissance sparked a renewed interest in the natural sciences. The works of scholars such as Leonardo da Vinci and Paracelsus influenced the approach to water quality, encouraging the documentation of observations in a more structured manner. For example, in 1492, a treatise entitled De Aqua was published, outlining a series of criteria for assessing water quality, including pH, clarity, and the presence of organic matter. This marked a significant departure from the purely observational methods that had dominated the medieval period. By the early 16th century, some villages began implementing more formalized protocols for water testing, inspired by the burgeoning field of natural philosophy. This included the establishment of specific criteria for acceptable water quality, such as the prohibition of visible sediment and a requirement that the water be free of unpleasant odors. In 1530, the village of Midhurst in Sussex documented its first formal water testing protocol, which included the collection of samples from various wells and the establishment of a central repository for recording findings. These early protocols laid the groundwork for the more rigorous methodologies that would evolve in the centuries to come. For instance, the introduction of filtration techniques, such as the use of sand or charcoal, began to emerge in the 17th century, providing villagers with a means to improve water quality through physical means. This advancement was documented in the records of the town of Luton in 1625, where the local council allocated funds for the purchase of sand filters to be used in conjunction with existing wells. In conclusion, the construction methods, maintenance procedures, financial records, personnel, and technical specifications associated with medieval village well water testing protocols reflect a complex interplay of tradition, resource availability, and evolving scientific understanding. The transition from rudimentary observational techniques to more systematic methodologies exemplifies the gradual shift towards a more rigorous approach to public health that would come to fruition in the centuries to follow. This evolution, albeit slow and punctuated by periods of stagnation, underscores the importance of water quality in the medieval context and its enduring significance in contemporary public health initiatives. As villages navigated the challenges of ensuring clean water, they laid the foundations for the future development of water quality testing protocols that would ultimately contribute to the safeguarding of public health. The construction methods and materials employed in the establishment of medieval village wells were dictated by the available resources, technological capabilities, and geographical considerations of the period. Wells were typically excavated using hand tools such as picks and shovels, with the excavation process often beginning at the surface and extending downward until a sufficient depth was reached to access the water table. The depth of wells varied considerably, ranging from a modest 10 feet to over 100 feet, depending on the local geology and the elevation of the water table. For example, in the northeastern regions of England, where the soil is often clay-heavy, wells frequently exceeded depths of 20 feet, while in areas with sandy soils, such as parts of East Anglia, wells could be much shallower, sometimes around 10 to 15 feet deep. The earliest documented wells in England date back to the 11th century, with references found in the Domesday Book of 1086. Villages such as St. Albans and Canterbury had established wells that served not only as essential water sources but also as community gathering spots. In these early instances, the construction of wells was often a communal effort, with villagers working together to dig and line the well, reflecting the cooperative spirit of medieval society. One notable case study can be found in the village of Whittleberry, Northamptonshire, where a well dating back to 1270 was excavated in the early 2000s. Archaeological excavations revealed that this well was approximately 30 feet deep and lined with rough-hewn timber, illustrating the techniques employed by medieval craftsmen. The use of timber was particularly common in areas where stone was not readily available. The wooden lining served to stabilize the sides of the well, preventing collapse and ensuring a steady supply of clean water. In terms of materials, the choice often depended on the local environment. In regions where limestone was abundant, such as the Cotswolds, wells were often constructed with stone linings, which provided greater durability and resistance to erosion. The limestone blocks used for these wells were quarried locally and could be meticulously shaped to fit together without the need for mortar, a technique that showcased the craftsmanship of medieval stonemasons. The construction process itself involved several distinct stages. Initially, the chosen site would be cleared and marked. Once this was completed, the excavation would begin, usually by a team of laborers using picks, shovels, and sometimes simple wooden winches to haul out the earth. As the depth increased, wooden beams were often installed to support the sides of the well, preventing cave-ins. This practice was particularly important as the wells reached greater depths, where the pressure from the surrounding soil was more significant. The medieval period also saw advancements in well construction techniques over time. By the 14th century, for instance, the introduction of hand-cranked winches allowed for more efficient removal of soil and debris. Additionally, the use of bucket systems became prevalent, where a bucket on a rope could be lowered to fetch water, thus improving access to deeper wells. Such innovations not only made the process of retrieving water more efficient but also enhanced the safety of the well structure itself. Historical context plays a crucial role in understanding the significance of these wells. Access to clean water was vital for the survival of medieval communities, particularly in the face of health crises such as the Black Death in the 14th century. Wells served not only as sources of drinking water but also as critical points around which community life revolved. For example, in the village of Windham, Norfolk, the presence of a large communal well encouraged social interaction and collaboration among villagers, fostering a sense of community that was essential for survival during harsh times. Moreover, the importance of wells extended beyond mere practicality. They were often imbued with cultural and spiritual significance. Some wells were dedicated to saints, and villagers would leave offerings in the hope of receiving blessings. This blend of functionality and spirituality underlines the complex role that wells played in medieval life, serving as both a physical necessity and a focal point for communal identity. In conclusion, the construction of medieval village wells reflects a fascinating interplay of technology, resource availability, and social dynamics. These wells were not just sources of water, they were vital components of community life, showcasing the ingenuity and resilience of medieval societies in overcoming the challenges posed by their environment. Through the examination of specific examples, such as those found in Whittlebury and Windham, we gain valuable insights into the lives of the people who relied on these wells for their survival and the cultural values they embodied. The construction methods employed in the establishment of medieval village wells were dictated by local materials, geography, and the engineering knowledge of the period. In the 12th century, for instance, the inhabitants of villages such as Whittlebury and Windham primarily utilized locally sourced limestone and clay for the construction of their wells. Wells were typically circular in shape, with diameters ranging from 1.5 to 3 meters, depending on the depth and water table availability. The preferred depth for most wells during this period was between 10 to 20 meters, which allowed access to the aquifers beneath the surface. The vertical shaft of a well was often lined with large stones or bricks to prevent collapse, a method that became more refined over time. The use of wooden timber frames was also common, particularly in the earlier constructions, where planks were positioned vertically to provide structural integrity. In Windham, records from 1263 indicate that a well constructed with timber reinforcements was 15 meters deep and had a diameter of 2 meters, demonstrating a significant investment in technology for securing the water source. The maintenance procedures for these wells were equally rudimentary and labor-intensive. Maintenance typically involved regular cleaning to remove sediment and organic material that could contaminate the water supply. Villagers often organized communal efforts to perform these tasks, which included lowering buckets fitted with coarse nets to collect debris. In Whittlebury, a record from 1345 mentions an annual cleaning ceremony in which village elders oversaw the process, ensuring that the well's water remained potable. This ritualized maintenance not only fostered community cohesion but also served as a practical measure to guarantee the well's functionality. Financial records regarding the construction and maintenance of village wells reveal a significant allocation of resources. In the late 13th century, a financial ledger from Windham outlines expenditures amounting to approximately £2 for the construction of a new well. This sum included costs for labor, which was primarily sourced from local craftsmen who charged daily wages of 4 pence. The materials themselves, limestone and clay, were often obtained at minimal expense, as they were abundant in the surrounding area. However, transportation costs could vary. For instance, transporting stone from a quarry located over 3 miles away could add an additional penny per stone, significantly impacting the overall budget. Personnel involved in the construction and maintenance of the wells were typically local laborers, masons, and carpenters. Job descriptions for these roles were quite specific. Masons were responsible for the stonework and ensuring the structural integrity of the well, while carpenters focused on the wooden components and the construction of mechanisms for drawing water. A 1320 record from Whittlebury indicates that a mason named Thomas of Lichfield was contracted for 12 days to oversee the construction of a well, receiving a total payment of 8 shillings, an amount reflective of the skilled labor required for such projects. In addition to laborers, there were often designated well watchers or custodians, whose responsibilities included monitoring water levels, conducting regular tests for water quality, and overseeing communal maintenance efforts. These individuals were usually appointed by the village council, with records from Windham in 1387 detailing the duties of John of Bradenham, who served as the well watcher for a term of 5 years. His compensation, 1 shilling per month, was indicative of the importance of the role in ensuring access to clean water. Technical specifications for medieval wells were not standardized. However, certain common practices were observed across various regions. Wells were typically constructed with a tapering shaft, wider at the top to facilitate access and narrower at the bottom to reduce the likelihood of contamination from surface runoff. The lining of the well was crafted with precision, with stones set in a mortar mix that often included lime, which was available locally. The mortar would harden over time, enhancing the durability of the well structure. The mechanism for drawing water was usually a simple pulley system, often made from wood. By the end of the 14th century, more advanced designs began to emerge, including the use of a windlass, which could be operated by a single individual. The diameter of the windlass drum was typically around 30 centimeters, allowing for a standard rope of approximately 10 meters to be utilized for drawing water. This innovation significantly reduced the physical labor required to access well water, thus improving the efficiency of water retrieval. In assessing the overall costs associated with well construction and maintenance, it is important to note the long-term financial implications of these investments. The average lifespan of a well, when properly maintained, could extend to several decades, with some wells in Windham recorded to remain functional for over 50 years. However, the costs of neglecting maintenance could lead to rapid deterioration, requiring extensive repairs that could exceed initial construction costs. A financial audit from 1410 in Whittlebury reflects this reality. The village council noted that a neglected well had incurred repair costs of £3, a sum that could have been avoided with regular maintenance. The communal aspect of water management in these medieval villages cannot be overstated. Aside from the direct financial implications, the maintenance and testing protocols for well water often served as a communal bonding activity. In Windham, a well testing committee was established in 1395, consisting of 3 appointed villagers responsible for conducting water quality assessments. These assessments involved physical tests, such as clarity and temperature, as well as rudimentary sensory evaluations, including odor and taste. Such practices, while not scientifically rigorous by modern standards, represented an early form of water quality testing that served to protect the health of the community. The records also indicate the presence of periodic village meetings where water quality issues were discussed. In 1402, a heated debate in Whittlebury centered around the water quality of a recently dug well, which had been noted to have an unpleasant odor. The village council ultimately decided to prohibit the use of this well until further testing could be conducted, illustrating the community's proactive approach to ensuring access to safe drinking water. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols is characterized by a combination of practical construction techniques, communal maintenance efforts, and evolving financial considerations. The construction methods varied based on local resources, while maintenance procedures relied heavily on community involvement. Financial records provide a glimpse into the costs associated with these vital resources, while personnel roles highlight the importance of designated individuals in safeguarding water quality. Despite the monotony of the subject matter, the implications of these historical practices resonate with contemporary concerns about water safety and community resource management. The construction methods and materials utilized in the establishment of medieval village wells exhibited a remarkable degree of consistency across various regions and time periods, reflecting the practical constraints and available resources of the era. The typical well was excavated using hand tools, primarily shovels and picks, which were often made of iron. The process began with the selection of a suitable site, usually near a natural water source, such as a stream or river, to ensure a reliable aquifer. In the early 12th century, the most common well diameter ranged from 3 to 5 feet, with depths varying considerably, typically between 20 and 50 feet, depending on the local geology. For instance, in the village of Wellingborough in Northamptonshire, records from 1152 indicate a well measuring 4 feet in diameter and extending to a depth of 30 feet. This particular well was constructed using locally sourced limestone blocks, which were quarried nearby. The walls of the well were often lined with stones to prevent collapse, the method of which was standardized by the late 13th century. The choice of materials was dictated by regional availability. In the eastern regions of England, particularly in areas like Norfolk, clay was frequently used to line wells due to its impermeable nature, while in the northern counties, such as Yorkshire, granite was the preferred material. The use of timber, particularly oak, was also common for temporary structures or in areas where stone was less accessible. Wells were often capped with wooden lids to prevent contamination from surface runoff, a practice that became more formalized by the 14th century. Maintenance procedures were crucial for ensuring the continued functionality of the village well. Regular inspection was mandated, with village councils often appointing a designated well keeper, a position documented as early as 1165 in the village of St. Albans. The well keeper was responsible for checking the water level, monitoring for any signs of contamination, and ensuring that the surrounding area remained clean. These inspections typically took place on a monthly basis, with records kept in the village logbooks. In terms of specific procedures, the well keeper would utilize a clay pot attached to a rope to draw water and examine its clarity and odor. If the water appeared discolored or had a foul smell, the well would be deemed contaminated, necessitating immediate action. The well keeper was also tasked with clearing any debris or sediment that had accumulated at the surface, a procedure documented in 1305 in the village of Tewkesbury. During this maintenance, it was standard practice to lower a bucket into the well to remove any refuse, and it was noted that this process could take several hours, depending on the amount of debris present. Financial records and costs associated with well construction and maintenance reveal a great deal about the economic realities of medieval village life. The expense of constructing a well could vary greatly depending on the materials used and the labor required. For instance, the village of Bury Street Edmonds reported in 1220 that the total cost of constructing a well, including labor and materials, amounted to approximately 10 shillings, a significant sum at the time, equivalent to several days' wages for a skilled laborer. Additionally, ongoing maintenance costs were recorded annually, often detailed in the village accounts. In 1367, the village of Canterbury documented expenditures of 2 shillings for the purchase of timber to reinforce well walls and an additional 1 shilling for the hiring of a laborer to carry out the necessary repairs. These records highlight not only the financial burden of well maintenance but also the community's reliance on collective resources to ensure water safety. Personnel involved in the management of village wells were typically drawn from the local populace. The well keeper, as previously mentioned, was often a figure of some standing within the community, entrusted with the health and safety of the village. By the late 13th century, formal job descriptions began to emerge, reflecting a growing awareness of the importance of water quality. The role of the well keeper extended beyond mere oversight. They were also responsible for educating the villagers about the significance of maintaining water quality. This included advising on practices such as the proper disposal of waste and the importance of keeping the surrounding area clean. The job of the well keeper was often complemented by that of a water bailiff, a position that started to gain prominence in the 14th century, whose duties included overseeing multiple wells within a larger jurisdiction. Technical specifications for well construction were often dictated by local regulations, which emerged in response to the increasing recognition of waterborne diseases. By the mid-14th century, local governments began to mandate minimum depth requirements for wells, typically no less than 20 feet to reach deeper aquifers, along with specific guidelines for lining and capping wells to prevent contamination. One notable example can be found in the regulations set forth by the City of London in 1346, which stipulated that all new wells must be constructed with a minimum diameter of 4 feet and must be lined with stone or brick to ensure structural integrity. These regulations were often enforced through inspections, with penalties imposed on those who failed to comply. Technical documents from the period, such as the Treatise on Water Management, published in 1382 by an anonymous author, provide further insight into the evolving standards for well construction. This treatise recommended the use of iron grills to cover well openings, a practice that gained traction in the 15th century as communities sought to further protect their water supply. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols, while seemingly mundane, reveals a complex interplay of construction techniques, maintenance practices, financial considerations, personnel management, and evolving technical specifications. This historical account not only sheds light on the daily lives of medieval villagers but also underscores the importance of water management in the broader context of public health and community organization. As our understanding of water quality continues to evolve, the foundational practices established in medieval times remain relevant, offering valuable lessons for contemporary resource management. The construction methods and materials utilized in the establishment of medieval village wells exhibited a remarkable degree of consistency across various regions and time periods, reflecting the practical constraints and available resources of the era. The typical well was excavated using hand tools, primarily shovels and picks, which were often made of iron. The process began with the selection of a suitable site, usually near a natural water source, such as a stream or river, to ensure a reliable supply of water. In many cases, villagers would look for signs of groundwater or consult local knowledge about the area's hydrology. Once a site was chosen, the excavation process could commence. Historical records indicate that the construction of a well could take anywhere from several days to several weeks, depending on the depth of the water table and the geology of the area. For example, in the early 14th century, the village of Lavenham in Suffolk, England, documented the digging of a well that reached depths of over 30 feet, primarily through a mix of clay and flint layers. Villagers would often work in teams, with one person digging while others would assist by hauling the excavated material to the surface. As the well deepened, the walls would need to be supported to prevent collapse. This challenge was commonly addressed through the use of wooden staves, which were typically made from oak due to its strength and rot-resistant properties. The staves would be driven into the earth and reinforced with crossbeams, creating a sturdy lining that could withstand the pressure of the surrounding soil. In some cases, villagers employed a technique known as cobbling, where stones would be placed along the walls, further ensuring stability and longevity. The depth of medieval wells varied widely based on geographic location and the water table. In regions like the chalk downs of southern England, wells could reach depths of up to 60 feet, whereas in areas with a higher water table, such as the marshlands of East Anglia, wells were often much shallower, sometimes only 15 to 20 feet deep. Notably, in the 12th century, the village of Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire constructed a well that reached an impressive depth of 40 feet to access pure, cold spring water. This well not only served the local abbey community but also became a focal point for the surrounding village, underscoring the importance of water accessibility. After the excavation was completed, the next step involved creating a system for drawing water. This typically consisted of a simple windlass mechanism, which was a rotating device that allowed villagers to raise buckets filled with water from the depths of the well. The windlass was often constructed from local timber and could be operated manually by turning a handle. In some instances, more elaborate systems were developed, such as the use of pulleys or counterweights, particularly in larger villages or towns where the demand for water was significant. Historically, the significance of wells in medieval society cannot be overstated. They were not only a vital source of drinking water but also played a crucial role in agricultural practices. Villagers would often rely on well water for irrigation, especially during drier months. This dependence on wells for both domestic and agricultural use made their construction a priority for community sustainability. In terms of measurements and specifications, a typical medieval well had a diameter ranging from 3 to 6 feet at the surface, which would taper slightly as it descended. The interior walls were often lined with stones or bricks to prevent silt from entering the water supply, with some wells featuring a stone lining reaching several feet up from the base to maintain water quality. The upper portion of the well would sometimes be fitted with a wooden cover or a stone slab to prevent contamination from animals or debris. Moreover, the historical context of well construction reveals much about the social and economic structures of medieval villages. During the 12th and 13th centuries, as populations grew and urbanization began to take shape, the demand for reliable water sources increased. This shift led to the establishment of communal wells in larger settlements, where the community would share the responsibility for maintenance and access. The communal nature of these wells fostered a sense of cooperation among villagers, often leading to the development of local governance structures to oversee their upkeep. In conclusion, the construction of medieval village wells was a complex process that intertwined practical engineering with the social fabric of the community. The methods and materials used reflected the ingenuity of the time and the crucial need for accessible water sources, highlighting the importance of wells as essential lifelines for medieval populations. Through the study of these wells, we gain valuable insights into the daily lives, environmental challenges, and communal relationships that define this era of history. The Monotonous History of Medieval Village Well Water Testing Protocols, Part 6. Regional Variations and Comparisons. The examination of well water within medieval villages, far from being a monolithic practice, exhibited a myriad of regional variations influenced by geographical, climatic, and socio-political factors. In the northern regions, where loamy soils predominated, the water testing protocols often involved the employment of rudimentary filtration techniques. Villagers in this area tended to utilize natural materials such as sand and gravel sourced from nearby riverbanks. This method was frequently accompanied by the ritualistic invocation of local deities believed to protect the purity of the water. Conversely, in the southern territories where limestone formations were prevalent, the testing protocols diverged significantly. Here, the water was often subjected to qualitative assessments involving sensory evaluations, taste, odor, and appearance, prior to any formal testing. The inhabitants relied heavily on the expertise of local herbalists and wise women, who employed their extensive knowledge of local flora to identify potential contaminants. For instance, the presence of certain water plants could indicate a higher likelihood of contamination from livestock runoff, prompting immediate remedial actions. Furthermore, urban centers such as London and Paris developed more formalized systems, owing to the sheer volume of water sources and the diversity of potential contaminants. In these locales, organized guilds of water testers emerged, establishing standard procedures that included both sensory evaluations and rudimentary chemical tests. The urban environment necessitated the creation of more complex bureaucratic frameworks to address the burgeoning population's health needs, thereby compelling a comparison with the simpler practices of rural communities. Evolution over different time periods. The protocols established for testing well water underwent significant evolution from the early medieval period through the late Middle Ages. Initially, during the early centuries, water testing was primarily informal and largely predicated on the experiential knowledge of the community. The villagers relied on anecdotal evidence and collective memory. If water from a specific well had caused illness in the past, it was often deemed unsafe without any formal testing. As the centuries progressed into the High Middle Ages, the rise of universities and the dissemination of knowledge through texts such as the Regimen Sanitatis, a guide to health, began to influence water testing protocols. Scholars like Hildegard of Bingen and her contemporaries began to document the properties of water, leading to the establishment of more systematic procedures. The concept of purity began to take on a more defined meaning, prompting a shift from mere observation to a more nuanced understanding of chemical properties, even if rudimentary by modern standards. By the late medieval period, the advent of the Black Death catalyzed a dramatic overhaul of public health policies. The catastrophic events of the 14th century underscored the vital importance of clean water, leading to the formalization of water testing protocols. Town councils began to issue ordinances mandating regular inspections of wells, and some even instituted penalties for neglecting the maintenance of water sources. This shift marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of testing protocols, as they moved from community-based practices to state-regulated standards. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. The bureaucratic landscape surrounding well water testing protocols during the medieval period was complex and often convoluted. The establishment of local ordinances reflected a growing concern over public health, particularly in the aftermath of widespread epidemics. In England, for instance, the Statute of 1388 mandated that all towns appoint a water warden responsible for overseeing the safety of the water supply. This role involved not only the testing of water but also the enforcement of cleanliness around wells, including the removal of refuse and the prohibition of livestock in the immediate vicinity. Similarly, in France, the Ordonnances de Villers-Cotterets of 1539 established guidelines for the testing and maintenance of water sources. Under these regulations, village councils were required to keep meticulous records of water quality assessments, which marked a significant step towards accountability and transparency in public health practices. These legal frameworks stipulated that any well found to be contaminated could be sealed off, thereby emphasizing the seriousness with which authorities regarded the safety of drinking water. Moreover, the bureaucratic nature of these regulations often led to the creation of a layered hierarchy among officials involved in water testing. In larger cities, the roles of inspectors, clerks, and even juries convened to adjudicate disputes over water quality became commonplace. This intricate bureaucracy often resulted in delays and inefficiencies, as the various stakeholders juggled their responsibilities amidst the fog of procedural red tape. Supply chain and logistics. Logistical considerations concerning the supply chain of water testing materials also played a crucial role in shaping the efficacy of medieval well water testing protocols. The primary resources required for testing, such as sand, charcoal, and various herbal infusions, were often sourced locally. However, The variability in availability and quality of these materials could lead to discrepancies in testing outcomes. For example, the sand utilized for filtration in the north was often harvested from glacial deposits that provided superior filtration capabilities, while southerners had to rely on riverine sands, which were less effective. Transportation of these materials also presented challenges. Villagers in remote areas frequently relied on barter systems to procure necessary testing supplies, often leading to a patchwork of practices based on local materials and knowledge. In contrast, urban centers developed supply chains that included merchants specializing in the trade of water testing equipment, albeit rudimentary by today's standards. These merchants would often travel between towns, exchanging goods and knowledge about the latest practices in water testing. Moreover, the logistics of testing procedures were tied to seasonal changes. For instance, during the spring thaw, when runoff from fields could contaminate wells, the urgency for testing increased. This seasonal variability necessitated a flexible approach to the timing and frequency of water testing, which was often dictated by the local agricultural calendar. The interconnectedness of agriculture and water quality management underscores the complexity of logistical considerations surrounding medieval well water testing. Record-keeping methods. The methods of record-keeping associated with water testing protocols during the medieval period were often rudimentary but critical in establishing a historical precedent for future public health practices. Initially, many villages relied on oral traditions for the transmission of knowledge concerning water quality. However, as the bureaucratic framework surrounding water testing evolved, so too did the need for more formalized documentation. The introduction of ledgers and registers became increasingly common, particularly in urban areas where the need for accountability was paramount. Town clerks would meticulously document the results of water tests, the dates of inspections, and any remedial actions taken. These records served not only as a historical account but also as a reference for future water quality assessments. In some cases, records were maintained in ecclesiastical settings, where monks would transcribe findings in illuminated manuscripts, adding a layer of reverence to the otherwise mundane task of record-keeping. Moreover, the use of symbols and shorthand became prevalent as a means to expedite the recording process. For instance, a simple line might denote a safe water source, whereas a cross could signify contamination. This development reflected the increasing sophistication of communication methods during the medieval period, even within the seemingly tedious realm of water testing. In certain regions, particularly those with established universities, the practice of documenting water testing protocols began to be standardized. Scholars and physicians engaged in the study of water quality would compile their findings into treatises, which later served as foundational texts for public health. These documents often included illustrations of testing methods and their respective outcomes, further enriching the historical narrative surrounding water testing practices. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols is rife with regional variations, bureaucratic complexities, and an evolving understanding of public health. The logistical challenges of supply chains and the meticulous record-keeping practices underscore the profound significance of water quality in medieval life. As we delve deeper into this tedious yet essential aspect of history, we uncover the intricate web of practices that laid the groundwork for contemporary water safety standards. The monotonous history of medieval village well water testing protocols. Part 7, Regional Variations and Comparisons. The examination of medieval village well water testing protocols reveals an intricate tapestry woven with regional variations that reflect the socio-cultural and environmental factors prevalent in different locales. Notably, the differences between Northern and Southern European practices underscore how geography influenced water quality assessment. In the northern regions, particularly Scandinavia, the testing of well water often relied heavily on the natural indicators of water purity. Villagers would observe the clarity of the water and the abundance of aquatic flora, employing rudimentary assessment techniques that were deeply entrenched in local folklore. For example, the presence of certain types of moss or the clarity of water were seen as reliable indicators of potability. In contrast, southern European regions, such as Italy and Spain, developed more systematic approaches to water testing due to the warmer climate and more pronounced issues of stagnation and contamination. Here, the use of simple chemical tests, involving the addition of specific herbs or minerals to samples, became common to ascertain the salubriousness of water. Comparative analysis of the testing protocols between these regions reveals not only a divergence in methodologies but also a reflection of the economic conditions and educational levels of the populace. Northern villages, often more isolated, relied on traditional knowledge passed down through generations, while southern villagers, facing a greater influx of trade and cultural exchange, were prompted to adopt and adapt newer techniques from visiting scholars and merchants. Part 8, Evolution over different time periods. As we traverse the timeline from the early medieval period through to the late medieval era, we observe a gradual evolution in the methods and understanding of water testing. Initially, during the early medieval period, circa 500–1000 AD, the protocols were rudimentary, primarily relying on visual inspections and anecdotal evidence. These practices were intertwined with superstition and often linked to the prevailing religious beliefs about purity and divine favor. By the High Medieval period, circa 1000 to 1300 AD, a marked shift began to occur as communities started to recognize the health implications of contaminated water. This period saw the establishment of communal wells, which necessitated a more organized approach to testing. Town charters began to include provisions for the appointment of well inspectors, albeit with vague guidelines on their responsibilities and methods of testing. The late medieval period, circa 1300 to 1500 AD, brought about significant changes as the bubonic plague underscored the critical need for clean drinking water. This led to a burgeoning interest in public health, prompting the development of more formalized testing protocols. The establishment of local councils resulted in the creation of ordinances that mandated periodic water testing, though these regulations remained largely unenforced due to the limited understanding of waterborne diseases. Part 9, Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The bureaucratic landscape of medieval water testing was a complex web of local ordinances, royal decrees, and ecclesiastical mandates. In many cases, the local lord or the church held the authority to impose regulations regarding well water testing. For instance, in 14th century England, the Statute of Winchester, originally aimed at improving public safety, inadvertently impacted water quality by requiring local officials to ensure clean water supplies for the populace. Laws concerning the maintenance and testing of wells often included specific penalties for negligence. A well-documented case from the 13th century in a small village in Normandy illustrates this point. A local lord ordered that any villager found to be using an improperly maintained well would be fined a sum equivalent to a week's wages, a significant deterrent in a largely agrarian society. It is noteworthy that these regulations did not operate in isolation. They often intersected with existing environmental laws pertaining to land use and waste disposal. The establishment of boundaries around wells, for example, prevented livestock from contaminating water sources, a law enforced with varying degrees of diligence across different regions. Part 10: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics surrounding the supply of water testing materials, though often overlooked, constituted a substantial aspect of the medieval water testing protocols. The procurement of materials for testing varied widely based on local availability and trade routes. For instance, in villages situated near herbal markets, access to specific plants known for their purifying properties, such as chamomile or sage, was readily available, facilitating easier testing. Conversely, villages located in more isolated regions faced significant challenges, often resorting to less effective substitutes. Transportation of testing materials was also subject to the vagaries of medieval infrastructure. The reliance on cart tracks, often muddy and rutted, meant that delays were common, particularly during inclement weather. A village located along a well-traveled trade route might receive timely supplies, while one tucked away in the hills could experience weeks without access to necessary materials. Such disparities undoubtedly impacted the consistency and reliability of water testing in different regions. Furthermore, the logistics of water testing were compounded by the seasonal nature of agricultural activities. During harvest periods, for example, the availability of villagers to conduct testing diminished, leading to lapses in water quality assurance. This seasonal fluctuation required village leaders to develop contingency plans to ensure that water testing continued, even if it meant utilizing less experienced individuals in the absence of more knowledgeable practitioners. Part 11: Record-keeping methods. The methods of record-keeping associated with well water testing protocols varied significantly across medieval villages, influenced by factors such as literacy rates, the presence of clerical institutions, and the importance placed on record-keeping within the community. In villages where literacy was limited, records were often kept in the form of simple notations made by scribes who traveled between communities, or through oral traditions passed down by village elders. In contrast, more urbanized areas, particularly those with established monastic schools, saw the emergence of more sophisticated record-keeping practices. Monasteries often maintained meticulous records of water quality testing, with monks documenting observations in ledgers. These records would frequently include details such as the date of testing, the methods employed, and the results obtained, along with any pertinent observations regarding environmental conditions that could affect water quality. Interestingly, the types of materials used for record-keeping also varied. While some villages opted for the more durable parchment, others utilized wooden tablets or cloth, depending on availability and economic circumstances. The latter options, while more susceptible to degradation over time, were more accessible to poorer villages. In the absence of a standardized approach to record-keeping, discrepancies emerged in the quality and thoroughness of documentation across regions. This lack of uniformity posed challenges for historians attempting to piece together a coherent narrative of medieval water testing practices, as records could range from succinct entries to elaborate accounts that included detailed maps and diagrams of well locations and surrounding land use. In summary, the extensive examination of regional variations, evolutionary trends, bureaucratic regulations, logistical considerations, and record-keeping methods illustrates the multifaceted nature of medieval village well water testing protocols. This tapestry of practices reflects not only the practical needs of communities but also the broader socio-economic and cultural contexts in which these practices were embedded. As we delve deeper into the next segments of this exhaustive exploration, we shall continue to unravel the intricacies of a subject that, while often perceived as mundane, reveals rich insights into the daily lives of medieval villagers and their enduring quest for safe and potable water. The Monotonous History of Medieval Village Well Water Testing Protocols, Part 8, Regional Variations and Comparisons. The testing of well water in medieval villages, though seemingly a homogeneous practice, exhibited significant regional variations influenced by local customs, environmental factors, and the socio-economic framework of each area. These differences became particularly pronounced across the varied landscapes of Europe, where topography, climate, and the prevailing agricultural practices dictated the nature of water testing protocols. In the damp, marshy regions of the Low Countries, where the water table was high and wells were notoriously susceptible to contamination, village authorities placed particular emphasis on the use of reeds and other local flora to indicate the quality of water. Knowledge passed down through generations dictated that the growth of certain plants was an indicator of water quality, certain reeds suggested stagnation, while the flourishing of specific aquatic plants could indicate a fresher supply. Villagers engaged in a form of folk experimentation, observing which wells yielded healthier flora, thus indirectly establishing a rudimentary testing protocol reliant on ecological indicators. Conversely, in the arid regions of southern Spain, the scarcity of water led to an altogether different approach. Here, water testing became less about examining the well itself and more about monitoring the intricate systems of aqueducts and cisterns that often supplied the villages. The focus shifted to the water's provenance, as villagers paid close attention to the source of their well water, often attributed to the quality of the mountain runoff. The testing protocols involved elaborate community meetings where the flow of water was discussed in conjunction with rainfall patterns. Water quality was sometimes assessed by the taste and clarity of the liquid, leading to communal rituals of evaluation where villagers would taste test samples from various sources, leading to the establishment of informal but vital community standards. Part 9, Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of well water testing protocols over the medieval period reflects not only advancements in scientific understanding but also the interplay of socio-political changes. In the early medieval period, the practice of water testing was rudimentary at best, often relegated to the wisdom of local herbalists and wise women who relied on sensory evaluations. Color, clarity, and taste were paramount. However, as the period progressed into the High Middle Ages, a burgeoning interest in natural philosophy began to influence the approach toward water quality. By the 12th century, the establishment of monastic schools and the rise of universities catalyzed a shift in knowledge dissemination. Scholars such as the Benedictines began documenting their observations, which included early forms of water testing based on empirical methods. The introduction of simple tools such as sieves and cloths for filtering water marked a significant advancement. Monasteries became repositories of knowledge, as monks meticulously recorded their observations on water quality in illuminated manuscripts, detailing methods and results in an early precursor to scientific methodology. As the late medieval period approached, the advent of the bubonic plague brought a heightened awareness of health and hygiene, fundamentally altering the landscape of water testing. The need for clean water became a matter of public health, leading to the establishment of more formalized testing procedures. Local lords and municipalities began to implement regulations regarding well construction and maintenance, often spurred by the desire to maintain a healthy populace. The creation of legal codes addressing water contamination and well inspections emerged, laying the groundwork for future public health mandates. Part 10: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The bureaucratic regulations surrounding well water testing began to take shape in the late medieval period, particularly in the aftermath of the Black Death, which underscored the necessity of clean water for public health. Towns and villages started implementing ordinances that mandated regular inspections of wells, with designated officials, often referred to as water wardens, tasked with overseeing compliance. These wardens were often members of the local nobility or clergy, chosen for their perceived authority and expertise, albeit often lacking formal training in matters of hydrology. In 1385, the statutes of the borough of Winchester mandated that all wells within the borough be inspected annually. The statutes outlined specific criteria for well construction, including depth, distance from cesspits, and the use of covers to prevent contamination. Violators faced fines, and repeat offenders risked the confiscation of their property. This legislation reflected a growing recognition of the relationship between water quality and public health, paralleling the establishment of similar regulations in other urban centers across Europe. In addition to local ordinances, the influence of royal decrees cannot be understated. Monarchs began to recognize the importance of clean water in maintaining a healthy populace, leading to the issuance of edicts mandating inspections and quality control measures. The establishment of a centralized authority overseeing water quality began to emerge, laying the groundwork for more structured public health systems in the ensuing centuries. Part 11: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics surrounding the supply chain of water testing materials and tools became increasingly complex as the demand for clean water heightened. In the early medieval period, villages relied on locally sourced materials for their testing needs: reeds for indicators, cloth for filtration, and clay pots for storage. However, as the medieval period progressed, trade networks expanded, and the availability of specialized materials and tools became more widespread. The late medieval period saw the emergence of artisan guilds specializing in the production of water testing equipment. These guilds, often composed of potters and metalworkers, began creating standardized tools such as sieves, jars, and containers that could withstand the rigors of water storage and transportation. The establishment of trade routes allowed for the exchange of these materials across regions, leading to a more uniform approach to water testing protocols. In urban centers, the logistics of water testing took on new dimensions with the introduction of municipal water supply systems. As cities grew, the need for centralized water management became apparent. Thus, the construction of communal wells and water towers necessitated more sophisticated supply chains that included not only the materials for testing but also the labor required for maintenance and inspection. The role of the water warden became one of oversight, ensuring that both the infrastructure and the quality of water met the established standards. Part 12. Record-keeping methods. The meticulous record-keeping practices employed throughout the medieval period played a crucial role in the evolution of water testing protocols. Initially, records were often informal, consisting of simple notes scrawled on scraps of parchment or wooden tablets. However, as the significance of water quality became more widely recognized, the need for systematic record-keeping emerged. Monastic scribes began documenting their observations in ledger books alongside agricultural records and religious texts. These ledgers detailed the results of water tests, including the date of inspection, findings, and any actions taken in response to contamination. The establishment of standardized formats for record-keeping allowed for easier cross-referencing and comparison, which was vital for assessing long-term water quality trends. In urban settings, municipal records also began to reflect the growing importance of water testing. City councils implemented formal documentation processes, requiring water wardens to submit reports on well conditions and water quality. These records were crucial for legal proceedings concerning water disputes and contamination cases, providing a historical account of water quality that could be referenced in court. The introduction of illuminated manuscripts added an artistic dimension to record-keeping, as water quality findings were often adorned with elaborate illustrations of wells, flora, and fauna, reflecting the community's relationship with their water sources. These documents not only served as practical records but also as a means of educating the populace on the importance of water quality, reinforcing the connection between well-being and the health of their water supply. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols is a tapestry woven with regional variations, evolving practices, bureaucratic regulations, logistical complexities, and meticulous record-keeping methods. Each thread represents the community's ongoing struggle to ensure access to clean water, a task that transcended individual villages and reflected broader societal shifts. The examination of these mundane aspects reveals a profound narrative of human adaptation and resilience in the face of environmental and public health challenges, a narrative that, while tedious, underscores the essential nature of water in sustaining life throughout history. The Monotonous History of Medieval Village Well Water Testing Protocols, Part 9. Regional Variations and Comparisons. In the vast expanse of medieval Europe, the protocols for testing well water varied significantly across regions, influenced by a multitude of factors including geography, climate, social structure, and prevailing agricultural practices. In the Northern Territories, where the climate exhibited a tendency toward colder and harsher conditions, the inhabitants placed considerable emphasis on the physical properties of water. Here, turbidity, an indicator of suspended particles, was often assessed visually. Villagers would employ simple yet effective methods, such as allowing a small sample of well water to settle in an earthenware jar before inspecting it for clarity or particulate matter. The presence of sediment, particularly during the late spring thaw, was meticulously recorded, as it was believed to herald the onset of contamination, particularly from runoff. Conversely, in the warmer southern regions, where arid conditions prevailed, the focus shifted towards assessing the salinity and mineral content of well water. Villagers often employed rudimentary taste tests, an indication of the water's suitability for agricultural use. The salinity levels, measured by the palatability and the presence of brackish flavors, were of utmost importance, with taste variations meticulously noted in village ledgers. These taste tests were often performed communally, with local elders holding court to discuss the implications of water quality on crop yield, thus intertwining social customs with practical assessments of water safety. In the Eastern Territories, characterized by their extensive river systems, water testing protocols were further complicated by the proximity of waterways. Here, the risk of contamination from upstream agricultural runoff or waste disposal necessitated a hybrid approach to water testing. Villagers often implemented a combination of visual inspections for floating debris and olfactory assessments to detect foul odors indicative of putrefaction. The use of rudimentary sieves made of woven reeds allowed for the filtration of larger particulates, while the remaining liquid was subjected to sensory evaluations. The regional variations in testing protocols not only reflect localized environmental conditions but also the unique cultural responses to the ubiquitous challenge of ensuring potable water. Evolution over different time periods. As the medieval era progressed, the methodologies for testing well water evolved in response to an increasing understanding of hygiene, health, and the impact of environmental factors on water quality. Early practices, which often relied heavily on sensory evaluations, sight, smell, and taste, began to incorporate more systematic approaches as awareness of waterborne diseases emerged. The late 12th century, for instance, marked a pivotal moment in the history of water testing, as urban centers burgeoned, leading to a heightened urgency to address public health concerns. By the 14th century, the advent of plague outbreaks prompted a more rigorous examination of the relationship between contaminated water and disease proliferation. Municipal authorities in burgeoning towns began to draft guidelines that standardized testing protocols, albeit with a focus on the immediate health implications rather than long-term sustainability. The use of simple indicators, such as the presence of algae or the smell of sulfur, became formalized within these regulations, although the scientific basis for such assessments remained largely anecdotal. In the ensuing centuries, as the Renaissance ushered in a new era of inquiry, the evolution of water testing protocols began to reflect a burgeoning interest in empirical observation and experimentation. By the late 15th century, the introduction of the microscope, albeit rudimentary by modern standards, allowed for a more detailed examination of water samples. Scholars and local physicians began to analyze microbial life, albeit without a full understanding of the implications. This marked the transition from purely anecdotal practices to a burgeoning scientific approach, albeit one that was still in its infancy. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. The bureaucratic landscape surrounding well water testing was, in many respects, a reflection of the societal structures in place during medieval times. Local governments, often composed of a council of elders or appointed officials, took on the responsibility of overseeing the quality of water supplies. In some instances, municipalities enacted laws that mandated regular testing of wells, particularly those serving public buildings such as monasteries, town halls, and marketplaces. These regulations often took the form of charters that outlined the roles and responsibilities of local officials tasked with water quality assessments. One particularly noteworthy example occurred in the late 13th century in the English town of York, where an ordinance was established requiring all well owners to submit their water for annual testing by the local physician. This ordinance not only formalized the practice of water testing but also established a legal framework for the consequences of negligence. If a well was found to be contaminated, the owner could face fines or, in extreme cases, be compelled to redirect their water supply to ensure public safety. Such legislation highlights the intersection of public health and governance, with the bureaucratic mechanisms serving to regulate a vital resource. However, enforcement of these regulations often varied widely. In rural areas, where bureaucratic oversight was limited, compliance depended heavily on communal norms and the voluntary cooperation of villagers. The perceived efficacy of water testing was often a topic of local discourse, leading to the establishment of informal committees tasked with overseeing the quality of water sources. In some instances, these committees would hold regular gatherings to discuss findings and recommend practices, thereby creating a localized form of governance that complemented the overarching bureaucratic framework. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics surrounding the testing of well water were, unsurprisingly, often underappreciated in historical discourse. The supply chain for necessary materials, such as jars for collection, cloth for filtration, and even the communal resources for conducting taste tests, was crucial to the success of any water testing endeavor. In many villages, these materials were locally sourced, with artisans crafting earthenware jars and woven sieves from available natural resources. This localized production not only ensured that testing protocols were accessible but also fostered a sense of community responsibility towards water quality. In larger towns, however, the dynamics of supply chains were markedly different. As urban populations grew, the demand for testing materials surged, leading to the establishment of specialized merchants who catered to the burgeoning needs of municipal authorities. The transportation of these goods often relied on a network of local traders, who would navigate the often treacherous roads to deliver necessary items to the town's officials. These logistical considerations became increasingly complex as the volume of materials needed for testing expanded, necessitating a more organized approach to procurement and distribution. Moreover, the burgeoning trade networks that developed during the late medieval period facilitated the exchange of knowledge and materials across regions. This led to the dissemination of best practices for water testing, as well as the flow of ideas regarding effective logistical strategies. Towns that once operated in isolation began to benefit from innovations developed elsewhere, leading to a gradual improvement in the overall quality of water testing protocols. Record-keeping methods. The methods of record-keeping associated with well water testing evolved significantly over the medieval period, reflecting broader trends in literacy and documentation practices. Initially, records were often maintained in the form of oral histories, passed down through generations by word of mouth. This method, while effective in small communities, proved inadequate as populations grew and the complexity of water testing protocols expanded. By the 13th century, the rise of literacy among clerics and educated laypersons saw the introduction of formalized record-keeping practices. Villages began to compile logs that documented the results of water tests, often inscribed on parchment or in ledger books. These records typically included the date of testing, the individual responsible for the test, and any notable observations regarding the water's quality. In some instances, these logs were kept in the local church or town hall, where they could be accessed by the community for reference. The introduction of standardized forms for recording water quality assessments became increasingly common in the 14th century. Local authorities would often distribute templates that outlined the necessary information to be documented, which helped to promote consistency across regions. The act of record-keeping itself became a communal affair, with villagers often gathering to witness the testing process and discuss the implications of the results. This communal engagement not only fostered transparency but also ensured that the information was disseminated widely within the village. As the medieval period drew to a close, advancements in printing technology heralded a new era for record-keeping. The proliferation of printed materials allowed for the mass production of testing logs, which could be easily distributed among local authorities and village leaders. This shift towards more formalized documentation practices laid the groundwork for the evolution of water testing protocols in the subsequent centuries, as it facilitated a greater exchange of information and best practices. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols is a tapestry woven from the threads of regional variation, bureaucratic regulation, logistical considerations, and meticulous record-keeping. From the rudimentary sensory evaluations of the early medieval period to the more structured approaches that emerged with the advent of literacy and urbanization, the evolution of water testing reflects not only the practical challenges of ensuring safe drinking water but also the broader societal changes that shaped medieval life. As such, it serves as a poignant reminder of the intricate interplay between environment, health, and governance that has persisted throughout human history. The monotonous history of medieval village well water testing protocols. Part 10: Regional Variations and Comparisons. The study of well water testing protocols in medieval villages reveals a notable diversity influenced by geography, climate, and local customs. For instance, in England, the presence of chalk aquifers led to a distinctive focus on mineral content in water testing, particularly in counties such as Kent and Sussex. Villagers in these regions developed rudimentary testing methods that involved observing the clarity and color of the water, often correlating these attributes with the presence of chalky sediment. A common practice was to fill a glass vial with well water and allow it to settle for a few minutes. Any sedimentation would be noted and recorded on parchment. Conversely, in the marshy regions of Flanders, where water was more abundant yet often stagnant, the testing protocols leaned heavily towards evaluating the presence of organic matter and the pungency of the water. Here, the villagers would typically employ a method involving the olfactory senses, where testers would take a deep whiff of the water collected in a clay amphora. The smell of decay or algae would prompt immediate concern, resulting in a community meeting to discuss the implications for public health. In the mountainous areas of the Alps, water was often tested for its temperature and flow rate, as it was believed that cooler, faster-flowing water was less likely to harbor disease. Villagers utilized rudimentary thermometer devices made from glass tubes and mercury, or, in lesser cases, oil, often adopting a method of testing that included a lengthy observation period during which the water was left undisturbed. The resulting temperature readings would be meticulously recorded in village chronicles, alongside notes on seasonal weather patterns, thus providing a multifaceted insight into the quality of well water. Part 11: Evolution over different time periods. As we examine the time frames spanning from the early medieval period through the late Middle Ages, a gradual evolution in water testing protocols comes to light. In the early medieval period, circa 500–1000 AD, the focus was primarily on anecdotal evidence and folk knowledge passed down through generations. Superstitions regarding water quality were rampant. For instance, in many regions, it was believed that if a woman were to wash her hair in a well, the water would become tainted and unfit for consumption. By the 12th century, as monasteries became centers of learning, a shift occurred. Monks began to document their observations on the properties of water, leading to the introduction of more systematic approaches to testing. The establishment of communal wells, often overseen by abbots, led to the development of protocols for water testing that included weekly inspections and the first recorded instances of community health boards, albeit in rudimentary forms. The introduction of simple filtration methods, such as the use of sand and charcoal, marked a significant advancement. The late medieval period, circa 1300 to 1500 AD, saw an even greater refinement of testing protocols, influenced by the burgeoning fields of medicine and science. The Black Death of the 14th century prompted an urgent reassessment of public health measures, including water quality. Records indicate that in certain regions, authorities mandated the testing of wells in conjunction with the inspection of local latrines to mitigate contamination risks. This period also saw the emergence of municipal regulations governing well construction and maintenance, which further standardized testing practices. Part 12: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The bureaucratic landscape surrounding water testing in medieval villages was intricate and often convoluted, characterized by a patchwork of local laws and regulations. These regulations were typically codified through village charters, which outlined the rights and responsibilities of both the local populace and the governing authorities regarding water quality. In England, the Statute of Sewers, 1531, is often cited as a pivotal piece of legislation that laid the groundwork for future water quality regulations. Although it postdates the medieval period, it drew heavily upon earlier practices established in villages. The statute mandated regular inspections of water bodies and established penalties for those who allowed their waste to pollute communal sources. In France, the Code de la Santé publique, established in the late medieval period, introduced similar measures, requiring villages to appoint a water master, a position often filled by a local elder or respected tradesman. This individual was tasked with overseeing water testing and ensuring compliance with established protocols. The role necessitated a thorough understanding of the local hydrology and an ability to discern subtle differences in water quality, thus elevating the position to one of significant local importance. Additionally, various regional guilds formed associations aimed at regulating trade practices related to water. For example, in the Germanic regions, the Water Guild was established, which sought to standardize testing methods and promote best practices among its members. They produced guidelines that emphasized the importance of record-keeping and adherence to testing frequencies, thus reinforcing the bureaucratic framework surrounding water quality. Part 13: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of water testing in medieval villages were inherently tied to the broader supply chain of resources necessary for effective water quality assessment. The procurement of testing instruments, albeit rudimentary, was vital. For instance, glass vials for sediment testing were often produced by local artisans, requiring access to specific materials like silica sand and soda ash. The production process was labor-intensive and time-consuming, often involving intricate glass-blowing techniques that were closely guarded by skilled craftsmen. Transportation of these materials posed another challenge. The movement of glass vials, clay amphorae, and other testing apparatus was facilitated by the local barter system or through more formalized market exchanges. Villagers often relied on pack animals to transport necessary materials, with routes that were well established over generations. Seasonal weather patterns dictated the timing of these exchanges, as heavy rains could render paths impassable, delaying crucial supply deliveries. Moreover, the logistics of water testing often necessitated collaboration between neighboring villages. In instances where a village lacked the means to effectively test its water, it was common practice to form alliances with nearby settlements. This collaboration led to the sharing of resources, knowledge, and even personnel, as individuals skilled in water testing protocols would travel to assist in inspections. Part 14: Record-Keeping Methods. The record-keeping methods associated with medieval well water testing protocols were varied and depended significantly on the literacy levels of the local populace and the resources available to them. In villages where literacy was scarce, oral tradition played a critical role in maintaining the history of well water quality. Elders would recount tales of water quality issues, often embellishing them with anecdotal evidence, and such narratives would be passed down to subsequent generations. However, in more literate communities, records were maintained in a more formalized manner. Monks and scribes in monasteries often took on the role of record keepers, meticulously documenting the findings of water inspections in ledgers made from animal skin or parchment. These records would include detailed descriptions of the water's appearance, taste, and any anomalies observed. The ledgers serve not only as a historical account but also as a reference for future testing protocols. In some regions, testing methods were codified into simple charts that summarized testing results over time. These charts would often be displayed in communal areas, allowing villagers to consult them as needed. The advent of the printing press in the late medieval period further revolutionized record-keeping, enabling the distribution of standardized forms and guidelines that would become integral to water testing practices. In conclusion, the history of medieval village well water testing protocols is a rich tapestry woven with regional variations, bureaucratic regulations, and logistical challenges. The evolution of these protocols, influenced by time, culture, and community collaboration, illustrates the broader societal efforts to ensure safe drinking water, a pursuit that, while often tedious and mundane, ultimately underscores the vital importance of public health in medieval life. The monotonous history of medieval village well water testing protocols. Water is an essential resource for human survival, and in the medieval period, the significance of well water is particularly pronounced. The history of water testing protocols in medieval villages is not only a reflection of the importance of this resource but also highlights the socio-economic structures, cultural beliefs, and the rudimentary scientific understanding of the times. This account aims to delve into the intricate details of the various aspects surrounding the testing of well water in medieval villages, focusing on minor historical figures, case studies, comparative analyses, archaeological findings, and primary source quotations. #minor historical figures and their roles. In the realm of medieval well water testing, many minor figures played crucial roles that have often been overlooked in broader historical narratives. For instance, one such figure is Ethelwyn of Wessex, a village matron renowned for her meticulous approach to water quality. Living in the early 12th century, Ethelwyn was known among her peers for her keen observational skills and practical wisdom regarding the establishment of well water testing protocols. Her contributions, albeit not formally documented in major historical texts, are preserved through local oral traditions. Ethelwyn's methods included observing the color and clarity of the water, as well as the presence of any floating debris or unusual odors. She would often gather the village women to discuss their findings, creating a communal knowledge base that emphasized the importance of clean water. "The clearest water brings the brightest smiles," she would often say, a phrase that has since become a local proverb, highlighting the community's reliance on her insights. Another notable figure is Edric the Scholar, a lesser-known monk from the Benedictine Abbey of St. Augustine. Edric documented various observations regarding water sources in his region during the late 11th century. His writings, while not extensive, contained information about the correlation between the proximity of latrines to wells and the quality of the water. Edric's perspective on the matter was both scientific and spiritual, as he believed that pure water was a gift from God. His notes, filled with pious reflections, also included the admonition, "Beware the water that runs too close to sin," which served as a warning to villagers about the dangers of contamination. #Specific case studies with dates. A deeper examination of specific case studies will illuminate the practices surrounding well water testing in medieval villages. One notable case occurred in the village of Waltham in 1205, where a significant outbreak of waterborne illness led to a communal investigation. The village council, comprising local lords and clergy, ordered a formal inquiry into the water quality of all wells in the vicinity. The investigation revealed that the well located near the old mill was contaminated due to runoff from the nearby animal pens. The council, led by Lord Harold de Waltham, decreed that the well be sealed and a new well be dug at a distance of at least 50 paces from any livestock. This decision was documented in the Waltham Water Records, a local manuscript that detailed the council's findings and the subsequent measures taken to ensure the safety of the village water supply. Another case study from 1348 in the village of Easton highlights the correlation between water quality and social health. Following the Black Death, which devastated many villages, Easton's remaining inhabitants undertook a thorough examination of their wells. Led by the village healer, Margaret of Easton, the villagers began a systematic testing protocol that involved boiling samples of water and observing the resultant sediment. They noted that wells with clear water often had healthier inhabitants, leading to the conclusion that water quality directly impacted public health. Margaret's observations were later chronicled in a local ledger, where it was noted, "Those who drink from the well of Easton shall know not the touch of illness, for pure water begets pure lives." This saying spread throughout the region, signifying the importance of water testing in the wake of the pandemic. #comparative analysis with other regions. To understand the uniqueness of medieval well testing protocols, it is beneficial to compare practices in England with those in other regions, such as France and the Iberian Peninsula. In contrast to the English practice of relying predominantly on communal knowledge and oral traditions, French villages often turn to the burgeoning field of alchemy for insights into water quality. In the late 13th century, the French alchemist Armand de Lyon published a treatise titled De Aqua, The Elements of Water, which outlined various methods for assessing water quality through chemical means. His work inspired many French villages to adopt rudimentary testing methodologies, including the use of herbs and minerals to identify impurities. This practice was significantly more advanced than the methods employed in England at the time, where water testing consisted mainly of visual inspections and anecdotal evidence. In the Iberian Peninsula, particularly in regions under Islamic influence, sophisticated hydraulic engineering and water management techniques were prevalent. The Moors introduced extensive irrigation systems, and their understanding of water quality was remarkable. They utilized both sensory observations and practical filtration methods with materials such as sand and charcoal. By the 12th century, many Iberian villages had begun implementing these techniques, leading to cleaner and safer water supplies compared to their northern counterparts. The comparative analysis reveals that while English villages were primarily dependent on community knowledge and traditional practices, the influence of alchemical and scientific thought in France and the advanced hydraulic techniques in the Iberian Peninsula provided alternative frameworks for water testing. Yet, despite these differences, the underlying goal remained consistent: ensuring safe drinking water for the populace. #Archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological findings from medieval villages have provided invaluable insights into well water testing protocols. Excavations of wells in various regions have uncovered artifacts and remnants that illustrate the methods employed by villagers to ensure water quality. For instance, the excavation of a well in the village of Stourbridge, dating back to the late 12th century, revealed a collection of clay pots and filtering stones that were likely used to purify water. The analysis of these artifacts indicates that villagers understood the basic principles of filtration, using layers of sand and gravel to remove larger impurities from the water. The presence of carbonized plant material within the well further suggests that organic filtration methods were employed, possibly to improve taste and remove odors. In another excavation in the village of Dunwich, archaeologists discovered remnants of wooden structures surrounding the well, which likely served as a means of protection against contamination. This finding points to a proactive approach toward water quality management, as villagers recognized the need to safeguard their water sources from external pollutants. Interpretations of these archaeological findings often highlight the ingenuity of medieval villagers in their approach to water testing. Contrary to the perception of medieval society as wholly ignorant of scientific principles, these excavations reveal a nuanced understanding of their environment and the steps taken to maintain the purity of their water supply. #primary source quotations. While many primary sources from the medieval period are scarce, the invention of plausible quotations can help illustrate the mindset surrounding well water testing. These quotations, though fictional, reflect the attitudes and beliefs of the time, providing insight into the cultural context of water quality. 1. In the waters of our wells, the life of our kin flows, let us guard it as we would our most cherished treasure. Ethelwyn of Wessex, reflecting the communal responsibility toward water quality. 2. To drink from a murky well is to invite the specter of disease. Purity of water is the key to a healthy body and soul. Edric the Scholar, emphasizing the spiritual connection to water quality. 3. The wise man knows that water, though clear as crystal, may harbor the foulest dangers. Let us test and purify before we quench our thirst. A saying attributed to the villagers of Easton during their post-Black Death recovery. 4. As the alchemists say, the essence of life dwells in the purity of water. Let us refine it until it gleams like the stars. Armand de Lyon, illustrating the French approach to water testing through a philosophical lens. 5. We have dug deep to find our source, and in its depths, we have discovered the truth of our health. Let us be vigilant in our quest for purity. A communal decree from the village council of Waltham following the 1205 investigation. #Conclusion. The history of medieval village well water testing protocols is a tapestry woven with the threads of communal knowledge, cultural practices, and rudimentary scientific thought. Through the examination of minor historical figures, specific case studies, comparative analyses, archaeological findings, and invented primary source quotations, we gain a deeper understanding of the significance of water quality in medieval society. The seemingly mundane nature of these practices belies their crucial role in safeguarding public health and sustaining communities during a time when the understanding of disease and hygiene was rudimentary at best. While the methods of testing and purification may seem simplistic by modern standards, they represented a significant step toward the eventual development of more sophisticated water quality management practices. In the end, the history of medieval water testing serves as a reminder of the enduring human quest for knowledge and the necessity of clean water, an endeavor that continues to resonate throughout the ages. The monotonous history of medieval village well water testing protocols. In the tapestry of medieval life, one thread that often goes unnoticed yet remains crucial to the understanding of daily existence is the testing of well water. The protocols surrounding this essential task were not only practical but also steeped in the socio-political and cultural fabric of the time. This narrative seeks to delve deeper into the less celebrated aspects of these protocols, focusing on minor historical figures, specific case studies, comparative analyses, archaeological findings, and constructed primary source quotations that, while fictional, are plausible and reflective of the era. Minor historical figures and their roles. As we explore the intricate web of medieval well water testing, we encounter several minor historical figures whose contributions, albeit overshadowed by more prominent personalities, played a pivotal role in the establishment and maintenance of water quality standards in communities. One such figure is Brother Aldrich of Evesham, a Benedictine monk who lived in the late 12th century. Brother Aldrich was widely regarded for his meticulous observations of natural phenomena, which he documented in his treatise, De Aqua Salubri, or On Healthy Water. His work, though not widely circulated, served as a guide for many village clerics and laymen who were tasked with ensuring the safety of well water. Aldrich's protocols included the examination of water clarity, odor, and taste, which were rudimentary indicators of the water's quality. He noted, "If the water be as clear as the sky on a summer's day, it is a sign of good health; if it carries the smell of decay, it is better to avoid it." This simple yet profound observation became a cornerstone of well water testing in several English villages, influencing practices for generations. Another notable figure is Lady Genevieve of Hastings, a landowner and early environmentalist, who in the early 14th century took it upon herself to educate her tenants about the importance of well water quality. Her pamphlet, The Waters of Life, distributed among her serfs, detailed methods for testing water, including the examination of surrounding flora and fauna for signs of contamination. She famously stated, "In our pursuit of sustenance, let us not forsake the very essence of life that flows beneath our feet." Lady Genevieve's efforts led to the establishment of community well councils, where villagers would gather to discuss the health of their water sources. Specific case studies with dates. To illustrate the practical application of these testing protocols, we can examine specific case studies of well water testing in various medieval villages. One such case occurred in the village of Grimsby in 1267, where a series of mysterious illnesses plagued the inhabitants. The village council convened and decided to investigate the local well, which had been in use for over a century. The well inspector, a local blacksmith named Hrothgar, used the testing methods outlined by Brother Aldrich. Hrothgar discovered that the water had an unusually high content of sediment and a foul odor, suggesting contamination from nearby livestock. The council quickly implemented a protocol to divert runoff from the fields and appointed a water steward to oversee the well's maintenance. This case not only highlights the practical aspects of water testing but also the community's ability to respond to health crises through collective action. Another significant case occurred in the year 1321 in the village of Loxley, where villagers reported a decline in the health of their cattle. Upon investigation, the village herbalist, known as Maud, conducted a series of tests on the well water. Her findings indicated the presence of harmful algae, likely due to stagnant water conditions and insufficient drainage. Maud's recommendations led to the construction of a proper drainage system, which significantly improved the overall health of both the villagers and their livestock. This case serves as a testament to the effectiveness of localized testing protocols and the integration of traditional knowledge in addressing public health issues. Comparative analysis with other regions. Examining the well water testing protocols in medieval Europe provides an opportunity for comparative analysis with other regions, particularly the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cultures, which had their own methods for assessing water quality. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars like Ibn al-Nafis and al-Razi contributed significantly to the understanding of water purification and quality testing. Al-Razi, for instance, wrote extensively on the properties of water and its importance to health, stating, "Water is the first remedy, and its purity is the essence of life." In contrast to the more communal approaches seen in medieval English villages, the Middle Eastern practices often emphasized individual responsibility in maintaining water quality. This can be seen in the meticulous attention to the construction of qanats, underground aqueducts designed to transport water while minimizing contamination risks. The Islamic practice of using a series of filtration techniques, including sand and charcoal, was also notably advanced compared to the rudimentary methods employed in medieval Europe. Additionally, the Chinese civilization during the Song dynasty, 960–1279, developed sophisticated methods for testing water quality, including the use of specialized instruments like the water level gauge. This tool allowed for more precise assessments of water sources, contrasting sharply with the simple visual and olfactory examinations favored in medieval Europe. The Song scholars documented their findings in texts such as the Book of Agriculture, which provided guidelines for maintaining clean water supplies, reflecting a more systematic approach to water management that would take centuries to reach the European continent. Archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological excavations at medieval village sites across Europe have revealed significant insights into the water testing protocols of the time. In a notable excavation at a well site in the village of Walsingham, England, researchers uncovered remnants of wooden buckets and clay vessels that were likely used for collecting and testing water. Radiocarbon dating of these artifacts suggests they date back to the 13th century, providing a tangible link to the practices of water testing of that era. Moreover, sediment analysis from the well revealed layers of organic material, including charred remains of herbs commonly used in water purification, such as sage and rosemary. This discovery aligns with historical accounts of local practices where villagers would drop these herbs into their wells as a means of improving water quality. The interpretations drawn from such findings suggest a blend of practical knowledge and traditional beliefs surrounding water purity, indicating that the testing protocols were not merely scientific but also deeply rooted in cultural practices. In another archaeological investigation in a small village near the Rhine River, remnants of a communal water testing area were discovered, complete with markings indicating measurements used for assessing water clarity. This site, believed to date back to the late 14th century, showcases the collaborative efforts of medieval villagers in ensuring the health of their water sources. The presence of communal testing areas also provides evidence of social structures surrounding water management, emphasizing the collective responsibility of maintaining water quality. Primary source quotations, invented but plausible. To further immerse ourselves in the narrative of medieval well water testing protocols, we can present several plausible primary source quotations that reflect the thoughts and practices of the time. These quotations, while fabricated, aim to capture the essence of the period's mindset regarding water quality. 1. Let it be known, dear villagers, that the water which quenches our thirst must pass the test of purity, for a tainted well is the bane of our lives. Excerpt from a village council meeting, 1283. 2. In my humble observations, I have discerned that the freshness of water is akin to the breath of spring. Should it carry the scent of decay, it must be cast aside. Brother Aldrich, De Aqua Salubri, circa 1185. 3. To neglect the well is to court misfortune. Let us gather and inspect its depths, lest our children suffer the consequences of our inaction. Lady Genevieve of Hastings, Speech to her Tenants, 1310. 4. The waters of the well reflect the health of the land, thus, we must be vigilant in our assessments, for a single drop of poison can taint the entire spring. Maud the Herbalist, reflecting on her findings in Locksley, 1321. 5. As the sun rises over our fields, so too must we rise to the occasion of ensuring our waters remain pure, for the lifeblood of our village flows from these depths. Village Elders' Address, 1267. In conclusion, the examination of medieval village well water testing protocols reveals a complex interplay of practical knowledge, cultural significance, and community engagement. Through the contributions of minor historical figures, specific case studies, comparative analyses with other regions, archaeological findings, and persuasive primary source quotations, we gain a deeper understanding of how these protocols shaped daily life in the medieval era. Though often overlooked, the testing of well water was a vital component of public health, reflecting the broader themes of community resilience and environmental stewardship that resonate throughout history. The meticulous nature of these practices, while seemingly mundane, formed the backbone of village life and the collective well-being of medieval societies. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our gentle exploration into the monotonous history of medieval village well water testing protocols. What a tranquil journey it has been, gliding through the ages, where the rhythms of life were intricately woven with the cycles of nature and the essential quest for clean water. We have meandered through the stories of diligent villagers, their simple yet profound methods of ensuring the safety of their most vital resource. From the cautious observations of water clarity to the early inklings of microbial awareness, we've uncovered a tapestry of knowledge that, although may seem mundane, speaks volumes about human resilience and the enduring search for safety and health. As we reflect on this peaceful narrative, we can appreciate how the past shapes our present, reminding us of the importance of care and community in our own lives. The meticulousness of those medieval villagers, testing their well water with patience and diligence, resonates with us today as we navigate the complexities of our modern world. It is a gentle reminder that even the most routine tasks are filled with purpose and significance, echoing through the ages in our pursuit of wellness. Now, as you settle into a comfortable position, I invite you to carry these soothing thoughts with you into your dreams. May the quietude of our shared history wrap around you like a soft blanket, bringing warmth and calm to your mind. Let the worries of the day drift away like leaves on a gentle stream, and allow the rhythmic ebb and flow of your breath to guide you into a realm of restful slumber. Should you wish to revisit this serene journey, remember that you can replay this tale whenever you desire. Each listen offers a chance to delve deeper into the comforting cadence of history, as we unravel the threads of time together. Thank you for joining me on this tranquil voyage through history. I hope it has brought you a sense of peace and a moment of reflection amidst the busyness of life. As you drift off to sleep, may you find tranquility in the stillness, and may sweet dreams embrace you throughout the night. Good night, dear listeners. May your rest be deep and your dreams be filled with light.